Arriving home early, a millionaire notices a strange silence in the air. Following a hunch, he enters his son's room and finds his cleaning lady kneeling beside his bed. The 7-year-old boy stands motionless, his eyes wide and tears streaming down his face. When the cleaning lady slowly turns around, holding something in her hands, the millionaire understands that his life will never be the same again. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us which city you're watching us from and we'll keep going. The sun had barely risen when Sophia opened her eyes, awakened by the shrill sound of her alarm clock. With a tired sigh, she got out of bed, her feet touching the cold floor of the small apartment she called home. The silence that surrounded her was deafening, a constant reminder of the loneliness that had become her companion in recent years. As she prepared for another day of work, Sophia couldn't help but let her eyes fall on the framed photograph on her nightstand. In it, a man with a wide smile was hugging a curly-haired boy, both with their eyes shining with happiness. The image, frozen in time, was all that was left of her family, taken away by a cruel fate. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the pain that never quite left her. But then she shook her head, forcing herself back to the present. She couldn't afford to lose herself in memories, not when she had bills to pay and a life to live. With mechanical movements, she prepared a simple coffee and put on her cleaning uniform. Her reflection in the mirror showed a middle-aged woman with tired eyes that hid a story of loss and overcoming. Sophia arranged her grey hair in a tight bun and went out to face another day. The crowded bus took her to the other side of the city, where imposing mansions stood behind high walls. Sophia got off in front of one of them, a modern building with straight lines and huge windows that reflected the blue sky. It was her first day working there, and she felt a mix of anxiety and determination. When Sophie rang the doorbell, she was greeted by a middle-aged woman with an air of efficiency. "You must be the new cleaning lady," she said, her tone a mixture of authority and disdain. "I am Mrs. Muller, the housekeeper. Follow me, and I will show you your duties." Sophia followed the housekeeper through the halls of the mansion, taking in the opulence that surrounded her. Expensive furniture, artwork on the walls, Persian rugs beneath her feet. It was a world completely different from her own, and she felt small and out of place. Mrs. Muller listed Sophia's tasks in a monotonous voice. "Mr. Eric is very demanding about cleanliness. Everything must be spotless, do you understand? And don't interfere in the family's affairs. You're here to work, not to make friends." Sophia nodded silently, absorbing the information. As they walked down a hallway, she heard a muffled sound coming from one of the doors. It sounded like a child crying. Mrs. Muller, however, ignored the sound and kept walking. Later, while cleaning one of the rooms, Sophia heard hurried footsteps and an authoritative male voice. "Thomas, how many times do I have to tell you not to disturb me when I'm working?" The voice was followed by the sound of a door slamming shut. Curious, Sophia approached the window and saw a man in a suit walking towards a luxury car parked at the entrance. His face was tense, his eyes fixed on the cell phone in his hand. Behind him, standing at the door of the mansion, was a boy of about 7 years old, his shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat. Sophia's heart sank as she saw the expression on the boy's face. It was a mixture of sadness and resignation that should not exist in someone so young. For a moment, she felt the urge to go to him, to offer some comfort. But the governess's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of her place in this house. The day wore on. Sophia focused on her tasks, determined to do a good job. But her thoughts kept returning to the boy she had seen. Thomas, she remembered. The name kept echoing in her mind, bringing back memories of her own son, of moments of joy that now seemed to belong to another life. At the end of the day, exhausted, Sophia was getting ready to leave when she heard the voice of the man she had seen earlier again. "I don't have time for this now, Thomas. Ask the housekeeper to help you with your homework." She hesitated for a moment, torn between wanting to help and fearing that she might overstep her bounds. Finally, she decided that she could not ignore what she was seeing. With cautious steps, she approached the boy who now sat alone in the dining room, a book open in front of him. "Hi," Sophia said softly. "You're Thomas, aren't you? I'm Sophia, the new cleaning lady. Are you having trouble with your homework?" The boy looked up, surprised by her gentle approach. For a moment he was silent, as if he were evaluating whether he could trust her. Then, with a small nod, he replied, "It's mathematics. I don't understand anything about it." Sophia felt a wave of tenderness wash over her. "Can I take a look? Maybe I can help a little before I leave." Tomas hesitated again, but then pushed the book toward him. Sophia sat down next to him and began to explain the problem in a simple, patient way. Little by little, the boy's face lit up with understanding. "You really understood," Tomas exclaimed, a shy smile appearing on his lips. "Thank you, Aunt Sophia." At that moment, Sophia felt something stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if a ray of sunshine had penetrated the darkness that inhabited her heart. She smiled back at Thomas, feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had found a purpose in this house beyond simple cleaning. As she said goodbye and walked to the bus stop, Sophia reflected on the day. The luxurious mansion, the absent father, the lonely boy. It all formed a puzzle that she could not ignore. Despite the housekeeper's warnings, Sophia knew that she could not simply pretend not to see what was happening. On the bus ride home, she looked out the window, watching the city lights come on. A determination grew inside her. Sophia didn't know exactly how, but she decided that she would do whatever she could to help this boy. Maybe by doing so, she could begin to fill the void in her own heart too. Arriving home, Sophia allowed herself a moment of reflection. She looked at her family photograph again, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't just feel pain. There was also a spark of hope. She couldn't change the past, but maybe she could make a difference in someone's future. With that thought, Sophia got ready for bed, knowing that the next day would bring new challenges. But now she had a reason to look forward to the morning. A boy named Thomas needed her, and that was more than enough to give her life new meaning. Days passed, and Sophia began to adapt to the routine at the Godot mansion. Every morning she arrived early, determined to complete her tasks perfectly. However, her eyes always sought out Tomas, the boy who, without knowing it, had awakened in her a long-dormant maternal instinct. One particularly busy morning, Sophia was cleaning Eric's office when she heard raised voices coming from the hallway. Curious, she approached the half-open door, trying not to make any noise. "Eric, you can't go on like this," a female voice exclaimed, filled with frustration. "Tomas needs you. He's growing up without a father present." "Clara, we've discussed this," Eric replied, his voice cool and controlled. "I'm building a future for him. When Thomas is older, he'll understand and appreciate it." Sophia recognized the voice of Clara, Eric's ex-wife. She came to the mansion occasionally, always leaving. Frustrated after heated arguments. "He needs you now, Eric," Clara insisted. "Not in 10 years, when you finally decide you have time to be a father." The sound of heels clicking away indicated that Clara had left, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Sophia quickly returned to her work, but her mind was filled with thoughts about the conversation she had just overheard. Later that day, while Sophia was tidying Thomas's room, the boy came in looking downcast. His eyes were red as if he had been crying. "Aunt Sophia," he said in a choked voice, "why doesn't my father like me?" Sophia's heart broke when she heard those words. She knelt down to the boy's level and gently replied, "Tomas, your father loves you very much. Sometimes adults have a hard time showing how they feel." Tomas sniffed, tears threatening to fall again. "But he never has time for me. He's always working or traveling." Sophia hesitated, searching for the right words. She knew she shouldn't interfere in the family's affairs, but she couldn't ignore the boy's suffering. "You know, Thomas," she began, choosing her words carefully, "sometimes people think they're doing their best even when they're not. Your father probably thinks he's taking care of you by working so hard, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." The boy looked at her with wide eyes, absorbing every word. Sophia continued, "What do you say we do something special for your dad? Something that shows how much you think of him?" The idea seemed to cheer Thomas. "Like what, Aunt Sophia?" "How about a drawing? You can show the two of you doing something together," Sophia suggested, smiling encouragingly. Thomas nodded enthusiastically, running to get his colored pencils. Sophia watched him work, her heart filling with tenderness. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground by getting emotionally involved, but she couldn't help herself. While Thomas drew, Sophia continued her tasks, always keeping a watchful eye on the boy. She couldn't help but notice how the mansion, despite all its luxury, felt cold and empty. The walls, although decorated with expensive works of art, were devoid of any family photos. It was as if material wealth was trying to fill an emotional void. At the end of the day, Thomas ran up to Sophia, proudly holding his drawing. "Look, Aunt Sophia, I'm done." The drawing showed two stick figures, one large and one small, holding hands, in front of what looked like an amusement park. Sophia felt a lump in her throat when she saw the hope in the boy's eyes. "It's beautiful, Thomas," she said, smiling. "I'm sure your father will love it." At that moment, the sound of the front door opening announced Eric's arrival. Thomas, excited, ran towards his father, his drawing tightly held in his hands. "Dad, Dad, look what I made for you," the boy exclaimed. Sophia watched from a distance, hoping that Eric would respond with the affection Thomas so craved. To her disappointment, the man barely glanced at the drawing. "Not now, Thomas. I'm tired and I have a video conference in 10 minutes, Eric said, walking past his son and heading toward the office. Thomas's smile instantly disappeared, his shoulders slumping in dismay. Sophia felt a wave of indignation rise within her. Without a second thought, she approached Eric. "Excuse me, Mr. Godot," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know it's none of my business, but your son spent the whole afternoon making this drawing for you. Perhaps you could take a quick look." Eric stopped, slowly turning to face Sophia. His eyes narrowed, a mixture of surprise and irritation on his face. "Miss Rossi, Sophia Rossi," she replied, standing firm under her boss's piercing gaze. "Miss Rossi, I appreciate your concern, but as I said, my family's matters are none of your business," Eric replied coldly. "Please focus on your duties." With that, he turned and walked into his office, closing the door behind him. Sophia stood there, feeling helpless and frustrated. She turned to Thomas, who was still holding the drawing, now crumpled in his hands. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said softly, kneeling down beside him again. Thomas sniffed, fighting back tears. "It's okay, Aunt Sophia, I'm used to it now." Those words, spoken with such resignation by such a young child, broke Sophia's heart. She hugged Thomas, letting him cry on her shoulder. In that moment, she made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever she could to help this boy feel loved and valued, even if it meant risking her job. When Sophia finally left the mansion that night, her mind was filled with conflicting thoughts. She knew she had crossed a line by confronting Eric, but she had no regrets. The image of Thomas, so eager for approval, and yet so easily dismissed, haunted her. On the bus ride home, Sophia reflected on her own loss, on the son she had never seen grow up. She wondered if fate had placed her in this house for a reason. Perhaps through Thomas, she could find a way to heal her own broken heart. Arriving at her small apartment, Sophia looked once more at the photograph of her family. For the first time in years, she felt not only pain at the sight of those smiling faces, there was also a renewed determination. "I'll make a difference," she whispered to herself, "for Thomas and for you." With that thought, Sophia prepared to sleep, knowing that the following days would bring new challenges. But now she had a purpose, a mission that went beyond simply cleaning a house. She would try to fix a broken family, even if it meant facing Eric's coldness and the limits imposed by her position. Sleep came slowly that night, but when it finally did, it brought dreams of hope and possibilities. Sophia fell asleep with a smile on her lips, looking forward to what the new day would bring. The weeks passed and Sophia became an increasingly constant presence in Thomas's life. Although she tried to maintain a professional distance, she couldn't ignore the hopeful look in his eyes every time he saw her. Little by little, a silent routine settled between them. One sunny afternoon, while Sophia was cleaning the living room windows, Thomas came running in, a crumpled piece of paper in his hand and tears in his eyes. "Aunt Sophia," he called, his voice shaking. "Look what happened." Sophia put down the cleaning cloth and knelt down to the boy's level. "What's wrong, honey? What happened?" Thomas held out the paper, revealing a math test with a red grade stamped on top. "I got a bad grade. Daddy's going to be mad at me." Sophia's heart sank as she saw the fear in the boy's eyes. She gently picked up the test, scanning the questions. "Thomas," she said softly, "this isn't the end of the world. We all struggle sometimes. The important thing is to learn from your mistakes and try to improve." The boy sniffed, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "But what if Daddy doesn't love me anymore because of this?" Sophia felt a wave of indignation rise within her. How could a child believe that a father's love was conditional on grades? Taking a deep breath, she chose her words carefully. "Thomas, a father's love doesn't depend on grades or achievements. Your father loves you for who you are, not for what you do." Even as she said these words, Sophia wondered if she really believed them. Eric's behavior didn't show much affection for his son, but she knew Thomas needed to believe that. "How about we do this?" Sophia suggested. "Let's review the exercises you got wrong together. That way you'll understand better and you'll be able to show your father that you're trying to improve." Thomas's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Would you do that for me, Aunt Sophia?" "Of course," she replied with a warm smile. "Let's get started right away." For the next hour, Sophia patiently explained the math problems, using real-life examples to make the concepts clear. She was impressed by how quickly Thomas learned when he received individual attention. They were so absorbed in the improvised lesson that they didn't notice Eric's arrival. The man stopped at the entrance to the room, observing the scene with an indecipherable expression. "What's going on here?" he asked, his cold voice cutting through the air. Sophia and Thomas jumped, looking at Eric in surprise. "Daddy!" Thomas exclaimed, a mixture of joy and apprehension in his voice. "Aunt Sophia was helping me with math." Eric frowned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Sophia. "Miss Rossi, I don't recall hiring a tutor. Your job here is to clean, not tutor." "My son." Sophia stood up, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "I'm sorry, Mr. Godot, I was just trying to help. Thomas was worried about—" "I don't care," Eric interrupted abruptly. "Focus on your assignments, please. And Thomas, go to your room. We'll talk about your grades later." Thomas gave Sophia an apologetic look before leaving with his head down. Sophia felt her heart sink at the boy's defeated expression. "Mr. Godot," she began, gathering her courage, "I know it's none of my business, but Thomas is a brilliant boy. He just needs a little more attention and—" "You're right, Miss Rossi," Eric snapped, his voice icy. "It's none of your business. You take care of the cleaning and leave my son's education to me." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Sophia alone with her tumultuous thoughts. She felt helpless and frustrated. How could she stand by and watch Thomas suffer from his father's coldness? That night, when Sophia got home, she couldn't get Thomas out of her head. She knew she was getting too involved, going beyond the limits of her job as a cleaner. But how could she ignore a child's suffering? As she was making some tea to calm her nerves, Sophia heard a knock on the door. Surprised by the late visitor, she cautiously opened it. "Hi, Sophia," a familiar voice said. It was Carlo, her neighbor and longtime friend. "Sorry to be so late, but I noticed you seemed upset when you got here. Are you okay?" Sophia hesitated for a moment before inviting Carlo in. They sat at the kitchen table, and Sophia poured out everything that had happened, her worries about Thomas and her frustration with Eric. Carlo listened attentively, his face expressing understanding and concern. When Sophia finished, he gently took her hand. "Sophia," he said softly, "I understand your desire to help, but you need to be careful. You can't risk your job over this." "I know," Sophia replied with a sigh. "But I can't just ignore what's happening. That boy needs someone who cares." Carlo looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've always had a huge heart, Sophia. It's one of the things I admire most about you. But remember, You can't save everyone. Carlo's words made Sophia think. She knew he was right, but something inside her refused to give up. Maybe I can't save everyone, she said slowly, but I can try to make a difference for one person, for Thomas. Carlo squeezed her hand gently. Just be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get hurt again. After Carlo left, Sophia lay awake for hours thinking about Thomas, about Eric, and about the complicated situation she found herself in. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she couldn't just turn away. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the Godot mansion with renewed determination. She would do her job perfectly, but she would also find subtle ways to continue helping her Thomas. As she cleaned the hallway leading to the boys' room, Sophia heard muffled sobs. Her heart sank as she recognized Thomas's cries. Looking around to make sure no one was seeing her, she knocked softly on the door. "Thomas," he called softly, "is everything okay?" The door slowly opened, revealing the boy's tear-stained face. Without saying a word, Thomas threw himself into Sophia's arms, seeking the comfort he so desperately needed. At that moment, holding the boy who suffered in silence, Sophia knew she could not turn back. Regardless of the consequences, she would do everything she could to bring a little light into Thomas's life. What Sophia didn't know was that her acts of kindness were not going unnoticed. In his office, watching the security cameras, Eric watched the scene with an enigmatic expression. Something was about to change in the Godot mansion, and Sophia would be the catalyst for that transformation. The days that followed were tense at the Godot mansion. Sophia felt Eric's watchful eye on her, as if he were waiting for her to make a mistake. Even so, she continued to carry out her tasks diligently, always finding moments to interact with Thomas. One morning, while Sophia was tidying up the library, she heard raised voices coming from Eric's office. Curious, she silently approached the half-open door. "Eric, you can't go on like this!" cried a female voice that Sophia recognized as Clara, Eric's ex-wife. "Thomas is suffering. He needs a present father, not a workaholic who barely looks at him." "Don't tell me how to raise my son, Clara," Eric replied, his voice cool and controlled. "I'm building a future for him. One day Thomas will understand and thank me." "A future?" Clara laughed bitterly. "What good is a future full of money if he grows up emotionally abandoned? Eric, open your eyes before it's too late." Sophia heard footsteps approaching and quickly went back to her work, pretending not to have heard anything. Clara left the office, passing her with a look of frustration. Seconds later, Eric also left, his face a mask of irritation. "Miss Rossi," he called abruptly, making Sophia jump. "Come to my office, please." With her heart racing, Sophia followed him. Had he realized she was listening to their conversation? As she entered the office, Eric closed the door behind her. "Miss Rossi," he began, his voice serious, "I have noticed your closeness to my son." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "Mr. Godot, Eric held up his hand, silencing her. "I'm not here to scold you. In fact, I want to make you a proposition." Surprised, Sophia waited in silence. "I've noticed that Thomas responds well to your presence," Eric continued. "And while I don't agree with some of your methods, I can't deny that he seems more happy since you arrived." Sophia could hardly believe what she was hearing. Was Eric finally recognizing his son's emotional needs? "I would like to offer you an additional position," Eric said. "In addition to your current duties, you would be responsible for supervising Thomas's studies and after-school activities. Of course, with a corresponding salary increase." Sophia was speechless for a moment. It was an opportunity to help Thomas more directly, but it also meant getting even more involved with the family. "Mr. Godot, I don't know what to say," she finally managed to reply. "Say yes," Eric said, a rare smile appearing on his face. "Thomas needs someone who understands him, and you seem to have that gift." Sophia hesitated. She knew that accepting this proposal would mean crossing a line she had promised herself not to cross. But the image of Thomas, lonely and in need of affection, weighed on her decision. "I accept," she said finally. I will do my best to help Thomas. Eric nodded, satisfied. Great. Start tomorrow. And Miss Rossi? Thank you. Leaving the office, Sophia felt a whirlwind of emotions. She had been given an opportunity to make a difference in Thomas's life, but she also knew that she was becoming even more involved with a family that was not her own. That night, in her small apartment, Sophia called Carlo, needing to share the news with someone. Sophia, are you sure this is a good idea? Carlo asked, concern evident in his voice. You're getting more and more involved with this family. I know, Carlo, Sophia replied, sighing. But I can't abandon Thomas now. He needs someone who cares. Just be careful, Carlo advised. I don't want to see you get hurt again. Carlo's words echoed in Sophia's mind as she prepared for bed. She knew she was entering dangerous emotional territory, but something inside her told her she was doing the right thing. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the Godot mansion with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She found Thomas in the living room, hunched over his schoolbooks. Good morning, Thomas, she said softly. Your father asked me to help you with your studies. What do you say we get started? The boy's face lit up with a smile. Really, Aunt Sophia? That's amazing. As she helped Thomas with his homework, Sophia couldn't help but notice how much more excited and confident the boy seemed. It was as if the simple presence of someone who cared made all the difference. In the middle of the afternoon, while Sophia and Thomas were concentrating on a particularly challenging math problem, Eric walked into the room. To Sophia's surprise, he wasn't in his usual hurried state. How are things going? He asked, his voice softer than usual. Thomas looked at his father with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Well, Dad, Aunt Sophia is teaching me a new way to solve math problems. Eric walked over, surveying Thomas's work. Impressive, he murmured, a hint of pride in his voice. Sophia watched the interaction with her heart racing. It was a small moment, but a significant one. Maybe, she thought, there was hope for this family after all. As Eric turned to leave, he paused for a moment. Thank you, Miss Rossi, he said quietly before leaving the room. At that moment, Sophia felt that something had changed. It wasn't just Thomas who was being affected by her presence, but Eric as well. She had planted a seed of change in that house, and now she could only hope that it would grow and blossom. As she continued to work with Thomas, Sophia couldn't help but think about the future. She knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. What Sophie didn't know was that her role in the Godots' lives was about to become even more crucial. Forces beyond her control were at work, and she would soon find herself at the center of an emotional storm that would test not only her resolve, but her heart as well. The weeks passed, and the new routine in the Godot mansion began to settle in. Sophia divided her time between her cleaning duties and tutoring Thomas at school. The boy flourished under her care, showing an enthusiasm for studies that had seemed non-existent before. One afternoon, while Sophia was helping Thomas with a science project, Eric walked into the study. His normally stern expression softened as he watched his son work intently. How are things going? He asked, surprising both Sophia and Thomas with his interest. Dad, Thomas exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. We're making a model of the solar system. Want to see it? Eric hesitated for a moment, looking at his wristwatch. Sophia held her breath, afraid he would refuse. To her surprise, Eric nodded. Sure, son. Show me what you did. As Thomas excitedly explained every detail of the project, Sophia noticed something she had never seen before, a genuine smile on Eric's face. It was as if a mask had fallen away, revealing the father he could be. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Eric called Sophia into his office. Miss Rossi, he began, his voice softer than usual, I want to thank you for what you've done for Thomas. I've never seen him so excited about his studies. Sophia felt a wave of emotion run through her. Thomas is a brilliant boy, Mr. Godot. He just needs a little attention and encouragement. Eric was silent for a moment, as if pondering his next words. Do you think I've been a bad father? The question took Sophie by surprise. She chose her words carefully. "I believe you love your son very much, Mr. Godot. Sometimes, it is difficult to balance the demands of work with the emotional needs of a child." Eric nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't know how to be the father Thomas deserves." At that moment, Sophia saw beyond the successful businessman. She saw a man struggling with his own insecurities and fears. She felt a surge of compassion for him. "It's never too late to learn, Mr. Godot," she said gently. "Thomas adores you. He just wants your attention and your time." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Eric's phone. He answered it quickly, his expression changing to one of concern. "I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible," he said, hanging up the call. Turning to Sophia, Eric looked distressed. "It was from the hospital. My mother had a heart attack. I need to go immediately." Sophia felt her heart sink. "Of course, Mr. Godot. Go. I'll stay with Thomas." Eric hesitated for a moment. "Thank you, Miss Rossi. I don't know when I'll be back. Please take care of Thomas." After Eric's hasty departure, Sophia found herself alone in the large mansion with Thomas. She knew that she would have to deal not only with the boy's practical needs, but also with his emotional concerns when he found out about his grandmother. Louise. Next morning, Sophia had to explain the situation to Thomas. The boy was visibly shaken. "Will Grandma be okay, Aunt Sophia?" he asked, tears shining in his eyes. Sophia hugged him affectionately. "Her father is with her in the hospital, doing everything he can. We have to be strong and hope that she gets better soon." The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Eric called periodically to give updates on his mother's condition, but the news wasn't always encouraging. Sophia found herself taking an increasingly central role in Thomas's life, comforting him in times of fear and uncertainty. One night, while putting Thomas to bed, the boy surprised her with a question. "Aunt Sophia, do you think Daddy will come back?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course, dear, your father is just looking after your grandmother. He'll be back as soon as he can." Thomas was silent for a moment before continuing. "It's just, sometimes it seems like he prefers to be away from me." Sophia's heart broke when she heard these words. She hugged Thomas tightly. "Your father loves you very much, Thomas. Sometimes adults have a hard time showing their feelings, but that doesn't mean they don't exist." As Thomas fell asleep in her arms, Sophia found herself reflecting on her own situation. She had become so much more than just a servant to this family. Somehow, without realizing it, she had filled a void in their lives, and they in hers. The following week, Eric finally returned. He looked exhausted but relieved. "My mother is out of danger," he informed Sophia. "Thank you for taking care of everything here." Sophia noticed a subtle change in Eric. He seemed more vulnerable, more human. "It was a pleasure, Mr. Godot. Thomas missed you very much." Eric looked at the stairs leading to his son's room. I missed him too." That night, Sophia watched from afar as Eric spent time with Thomas, reading a bedtime story. It was a sight she had never witnessed before, and she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. As she was preparing to leave, Sophia was surprised by Eric at the door. "Miss Rossi?" "Sophia," he began hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you again, not just for taking care of Thomas, but for showing me what I was missing." Sophia felt her heart race. There was something different in Eric's gaze, a softness she had never noticed before. "I'm happy to help," she replied softly. For a moment they stood there, staring at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Sophia felt that something had irrevocably changed, not only in the Godot family dynamic, but in her own heart as well. As she walked home that night, Sophia knew she was entering dangerous emotional territory. She had grown attached to Thomas, and now she was beginning to see Eric in a new light. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same again. What Sophia didn't know was that the changes were just beginning. A new challenge was about to emerge, one that would test not only the bonds she had formed, with the Godots but also her own inner strength. The days that followed brought a new dynamic to the Godot mansion. Eric, impacted by the experience of nearly losing his mother, began to make a visible effort to be more present in Thomas's life. Sophia watched with a mixture of joy and apprehension as this father-son relationship evolved. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Sophia arrived at the mansion for her usual chores and was surprised by an unusual scene in the garden. Eric and Thomas were playing soccer, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a sight that warmed Sophia's heart, but it also made her feel strangely out of place. "Aunt Sophia," Thomas shouted when he saw her, running towards her with a beaming smile. "Come play with us." Sophia hesitated, looking to Eric for approval. To her surprise, he smiled and waved for her to join them. "Come on, Miss Rossi," Eric said, a softness in his voice that Sophia rarely heard. "Show us your skills." The three of them spent the afternoon playing games, laughing, and enjoying the sunshine. Sophia couldn't help but notice how much more relaxed, more human Eric seemed. It was as if a barrier had fallen away, revealing a man completely different from the cold businessman she had initially met. As they rested in the shade of a tree, Thomas looked at Sophia and Eric with shining eyes. "That was the best day ever," he exclaimed. "Can we do this every Saturday?" Eric exchanged a look with Sophia before answering. "Of course, son. And maybe Miss Rossi could join us once in a while." Sophia felt her heart race at the implied invitation. I'd love to," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Eric invited Sophia to his office for a chat. She entered with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. "Sophia," Eric began, using her first name. "For the first time, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for our family." Sophia smiled shyly. "There's no need to thank me, Mr. Godot. I really care about Thomas. And you too," she added, blushing slightly. Eric stared at her intently for a moment before continuing. "You've shown us what we've been missing. I'd like to make you a proposition." Sophia's heart raced. "A proposal?" "Yes," Eric said, sounding a little nervous. "I'd like you to move here, to the mansion, not just as an employee, but as part of the family." Sophia was speechless for a moment, her mind spinning with the implications of this offer. "Mr. Godot, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he replied softly. "Thomas adores you, and I've discovered that I quite like your presence here." Before Sophia could respond, they were interrupted by a scream coming from Thomas's room. They both ran to see what was happening. They found the boy sitting up in bed, sweating and shaking. "It was just a nightmare," Thomas said, still frightened. "I dreamed that you two went away and left me alone." Sophia and Eric exchanged worried glances before sitting on the bed, one on either side of Thomas. "That will never happen, son," Eric said, hugging the boy. "We're here for you always." Sophia felt tears well up in her eyes as she watched the scene. It was the kind of family moment she had missed for so long, and now, inexplicably, she was experiencing it again. After Thomas calmed down and fell asleep again, Sophia and Eric quietly left the room. "Think about my proposal," Eric said softly. "You don't have to answer now, but know that you are already part of this family, Sophia." That night in her small apartment, Sophia found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. Eric's offer was tempting, offering not only financial security, but also the chance to be part of a family again. Yet she couldn't help but wonder if she was crossing a line she shouldn't have. Sophia picked up the phone and called Carlo, needing advice. "Sophia, are you sure about this?" Carlo asked, concern evident in his voice. "It sounds like you're getting too involved with this family." "I know, Carlo," Sophia replied, sighing, "but I can't deny that I feel happy there. It's like I've found a place to belong again." "Just be careful," Carlo advised. "Remember, you're an employee. No matter how much they tell you, you're part of the family. Things can change quickly." Carlo's words echoed in Sophia's mind as she tried to sleep. She knew he was right to be cautious, but her heart was torn. On one side, the desire to belong, to be part of a family again. On the other, the fear of getting hurt, of losing everything once again. What Sophia didn't know was that her decision would be complicated by a new element. The next morning, when she arrived at the mansion, she was greeted by an unexpected visitor. Clara, Eric's ex-wife, was back, and she didn't seem at all happy with Sophia's increasingly constant presence in Thomas and Eric's lives. Clara's cold gaze as she watched Sophia enter made it clear that a new battle was about to begin. A battle that would test not only Sophia's loyalty, but also the fragile bonds she had begun to form with the Godos. Sophia took a deep breath, preparing herself to face whatever came next. She knew that her journey with the Godos was far from over, and that the most difficult challenges were yet to come. The tension was palpable in the living room of the Godo mansion. Clara, with her piercing eyes fixed on Sophia, seemed ready for a confrontation. Eric, visibly uncomfortable, tried to remain calm, while Thomas, confused by the situation, looked from one adult to the other. "So," Clara began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "this is the famous Sophia who has been so indispensable to you?" Sophia felt her heart race, but she kept her composure. "Mrs. Godot, it's a pleasure to meet you. I hope you are well." Clara laughed humorlessly. "Oh, I'm fine, especially now that I've come to see for myself how my son is being raised by a maid." Eric intervened, his voice firm. "Clara, that's enough. Sophia has been a great help to Thomas and this family." "Family?" Clara repeated in disbelief. "She's not family, Eric. She's an employee, nothing more." Thomas, sensing the hostility in the air, instinctively approached Sophia. "Mummy, why are you being mean to Aunt Sophia? She's nice to me." Thomas's words seemed to hit Clara like a slap. Her eyes filled with tears of anger and frustration. "You don't understand, dear. She's trying to take my place." Sophia, feeling that the situation was getting out of hand, decided to intervene. "Mrs. Godot, I can assure you that I am not trying to take anyone's place. My only goal is to help Thomas and—" "Spare me your explanations," Clara interrupted her. "Eric, I demand that you fire this woman immediately. Otherwise, I will sue for full custody of Thomas." The silence that followed was deafening. Eric looked at Sophia, then at Thomas, who was now crying silently, and finally at Clara. His expression was a mixture of anger and resignation. "Clara, let's talk in private," he finally said, guiding his ex-wife to his office. Sophia was left alone with Thomas, trying to calm him down. "It's okay, honey. Sometimes adults argue, but that doesn't mean they don't love you." Thomas looked at her with teary eyes. "Are you leaving, Aunt Sophia?" Sophia's heart broke at the question. I don't know, Thomas, but no matter what happens, I will always care about you." Meanwhile, in the office, Eric and Clara were having a heated argument. "You can't just come in here and make demands, Clara," Eric said, exasperated. "Sophia has been a blessing to this family." Clara laughed bitterly. "Family? Is that what you are now? A happy, pretend family?" "It's no lie," Eric replied, his voice softer. "For the first time in years, this house feels like home. And a lot of that is thanks to Sophia." Clara looked at him, a mixture of hurt and understanding in her eyes. "You like her, don't you?" Eric hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, I do. But that's not all. She brought something that was missing here, something that neither you nor I could give Thomas." Eric's words seemed to hit Clara hard. She sat down, looking suddenly tired. "I only want the best for my son, Eric." "I know," he replied, sitting down next to her. "And believe me, Sophia wants the same. She's not here to replace you, Clara. She's here to complement our family." Outside the office, Sophia waited anxiously, trying not to listen to the conversation, but unable to completely ignore the raised tones that occasionally escaped through the door. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the door opened. Eric and Clara walked out, both with serious but less hostile expressions. Clara approached Sophia, her gaze still suspicious, but no longer openly hostile. "Miss Rossi, it seems I have underestimated your importance in this household. I apologize for my earlier behavior." Sophia, surprised by the change in tone, simply nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Godot. I understand your concern, and I want you to know that it was never my intention to cause trouble." Eric then addressed everyone in the room. "Let's try a new arrangement. Sophia will continue working here and helping with Thomas. Clara, you will have more time with him on the weekends, and we will all try to cooperate for Thomas's sake." Thomas, who had been watching everything silently, suddenly smiled. "Does this mean Aunt Sophia can stay?" Eric looked at Clara, who nodded reluctantly. "Yes, son. Sophia will stay." The relief Sophia felt was momentary, for she knew that the challenges were far from over. The family dynamics had changed irrevocably, and she now found herself in even more complicated emotional territory. That night, alone in her apartment, Sophia reflected on the day's events. She knew she had crossed a line, becoming much more than a simple employee for the Godots. Her heart was torn between the joy of being part of this family and the fear of the complications that this could bring. As she prepared for bed, Sophia couldn't help but think about Eric. The way he defended her, the look in his eyes when he talked about her. There was something there, something she wasn't ready to admit, not even to herself. What Sophia didn't know was that at that very moment, Eric was in his office, looking at a picture of Thomas and feeling for the first time in years that his house had finally become a home. And a big part of that, he knew, was thanks to Sophia. The future was uncertain, full of possible complications and challenges. But one thing was clear: life at Godot Manor would never be the same again. And Sophia, for better or worse, was now an integral part of this new reality. The weeks that followed brought a new routine to the Godot mansion. Sophia, now living in a room in the staff quarters, was more present than ever in Thomas's life, and by extension, Eric's. The initial tension with Clara had subsided, but Sophia still felt the watchful eye of Eric's ex-wife whenever she came to pick up Thomas for the weekends. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, while Sophia was organizing some books in the library, Eric walked in, looking worried. "Sophia, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his voice strained. Sophia nodded, feeling butterflies in her stomach. "Of course, Mr. Godot. Did something happen?" Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's about the company. We're facing a crisis and, well, I need to go abroad for a few weeks, maybe a month." Sophia's heart sank. She immediately thought of Tomas. "What about Tomas? Does he know?" "Not yet," Eric replied, looking guilty. "Actually, I wanted to ask for your help. Could you stay with him while I'm gone? I know it's a lot to ask, but I trust you more than anyone else." Sophia felt a wave of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, she was happy for Eric's trust. On the other, she worried about the implications of taking on such a central role in Thomas's life. "Of course," she finally replied. "I'll do my best to take care of him, but you need to talk to Thomas about this. He's going to miss you." Eric nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I know. I'll talk to him tonight. Thank you, Sophia. I don't know what I'd do without you." That night, after Eric had talked to Thomas, Sophia found the boy in his room, visibly upset. "Aunt Sophia," he said in a choked voice, "why does Daddy always have to go away?" Sophia sat down next to him on the bed, putting her arm around his shoulders. "Your father loves you very much, Thomas. Sometimes adults have to do hard things to protect the people they love. But that doesn't mean he wants to be away from you." Thomas sniffed, leaning his head on Sophia's shoulder. "Do you promise you won't leave too?" Sophia's heart clenched at the question. "I promise I'll be here for you, Thomas, whenever you need me." In the days following Eric's departure, Sophia found herself juggling multiple roles: caregiver, tutor, and mother figure to Thomas. She struggled to maintain his routine, helping him with his homework, preparing his favorite meals, and comforting him when he missed his father. One night, while they were watching a movie together in the living room, Thomas looked at Sophia with curious eyes. "Aunt Sophia, have you ever thought about getting married?" The question took Sophia by surprise. "Well, I was married once, Thomas, a long time ago." The boy's eyes widened. "Really? And what happened?" Sophia felt a lump in her throat. It was the first time she had spoken about her past with anyone in the Godot family. I lost my husband and my son in an accident, dear. Thomas was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, to Sophia's surprise, he hugged her tightly. I'm so sorry, Aunt Sophia. That must have been really sad. Sophia felt tears in her eyes, moved by the boy's empathy. It was, Thomas. But you know what? Meeting you and your father brought so much joy back into my life. Just then, the phone. It was Eric, calling to speak to Thomas. Sophia watched the boy's face light up as he told his father about his day. When the call ended, Thomas looked thoughtful. Aunt Sophia, he said hesitantly, do you think Daddy likes you? Sophia felt her face heat up. I think your father sees me as a friend and a helper, Thomas. Why? Thomas shrugged. It's just that he always asks about you when he calls, and he smiles differently when he says your name. Thomas's words echoed in Sophia's mind long after she had put the boy to bed. She couldn't deny that her feelings for Eric had deepened over the months, but could it be that he felt the same way? The following week, Sophia received an unexpected call from Clara. Eric's ex-wife wanted to meet her for a chat. Apprehensive, Sophia agreed to meet her at a cafe in the city center. When she arrived at the appointed spot, Sophia found Clara already seated, a serious expression on her face. Thank you for coming, Sophia, Clara said, indicating the chair across from her. We need to talk about Eric and Thomas. Sophia sat down, her heart racing. Of course, Mrs. Godot. What would you like to discuss? Clara looked at her intently before speaking. I want to know your true intentions with my family. Are you taking advantage of Eric's absence to get closer to Thomas, or perhaps Eric himself? Sophia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Mrs. Godot, I assure you that my intentions are purely... Clara interrupted her. Spare me the apologies, Sophia. I see the way Eric looks at you. And now, with him out of the country, you have a clear path to establish yourself as Thomas's new mother. Is that what you want? Clara's accusations left Sophia speechless for a moment. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Mrs. Godot, I understand your concern, but I can assure you that I am not trying to replace anyone. My only goal is to help Thomas and do my job as best I can. Clara studied her for a long moment before speaking again. Maybe you really believe that, Sophia, but things don't always go as planned. Just remember, Thomas is my son. And Eric, well, Eric has a history of tiring of people quickly. With those words, Clara stood up and left, leaving Sophia alone with her turbulent thoughts. Clara's accusations had touched on fears and insecurities that Sophia had been trying to ignore. As she walked back to the mansion, Sophia wondered if she had crossed a line without realizing it. Was she really taking advantage of the situation? And more importantly, what would happen when Eric returned? What Sophia didn't know was that at that very moment, thousands of miles away, Eric was sitting in his hotel room, staring at a photo of Thomas and Sophia that he kept in his wallet. His thoughts were far from the business that had brought him here. They were home with the family he was beginning to imagine he could have. The future was uncertain, full of possibilities and dangers. Sophia knew that the next few weeks would be crucial. She would have to carefully navigate between her professional role and her personal feelings, always putting Thomas's well-being first. Meanwhile, the shadow of Clara's words loomed over her, a constant reminder that the balance she had found in the Godot mansion was fragile and could be shattered at any moment. The weeks dragged by in Eric's absence, and Sophia found herself increasingly immersed in the Godot family's routine. Her responsibilities went far beyond simple household chores. She had become Thomas's emotional pillar and the de facto manager of the household. One morning, while preparing breakfast for Thomas, Sophia received an unexpected phone call. It was Eric. Sophia, his voice sounded tired, but there was a hint of urgency in it. I need your help. There's been a business complication and I'll have to be away longer than expected. Sophia's heart sank. She immediately thought of Thomas and how he would take the news. How much longer, Mr. Godot? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maybe another month, possibly 2. Sophia, I know I'm asking a lot. But don't worry, Sophia interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I'll take care of everything here. But Mr. Godot, Thomas needs to hear this from you. Eric sighed. You're right. Can I talk to him now? Sophia called Thomas, who came running over, eager to speak to his father. She watched the boy's face change from joy to disappointment as he heard the news. When the call ended, Thomas handed the phone back to Sophia, tears in his eyes. He always does that, Thomas muttered. Always chooses work over me. Sophia knelt, down to be at eye level with the boy. Thomas, your father loves you very much. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices to protect the people they love. Thomas looked at her, a mixture of sadness and hope in his eyes. Aunt Sophia, do you promise you won't leave me too? The request took Sophia by surprise. She hesitated for a moment, aware of the weight of her words. Thomas, I promise I will. Always be here for you one way or another. That night, after putting Thomas to bed, Sophia found herself alone with her thoughts. Clara's words echoed in her mind, mixing with her own doubts and fears. Was she really overstepping the bounds of her role? Was she becoming too attached to a family that wasn't her own? His thoughts were interrupted by a new call. It was Carlo, his friend and neighbor. Sophia, how are you? He asked, concern evident in his voice. It's been a while since we last spoke. Sophia sighed, feeling the weight of her worries. Oh, Carlo, I'm fine, but things are complicated here. She opened up to her friend, telling him about Eric's prolonged absence, Clara's accusations, and her growing connection with Thomas. Sophia, Carlo said after hearing everything, you need to be careful. You're getting too involved with this family. What if Eric comes back and decides he doesn't need you anymore? Carlo's words hit Sophia like a bucket of cold water. She knew he was right to be worried, but something inside her refused to accept the possibility of leaving the Godots. I know, Carlo, she finally replied, but I can't just abandon Thomas now. He needs me. Carlo sighed on the other end of the, just don't forget who you are, Sophia. Don't lose your own identity trying to fill the voids in this family. After hanging up, Sophia lay awake for hours, reflecting on her situation. She knew she was on dangerous emotional ground, but she couldn't see a way out that wouldn't hurt Thomas. Days turned into weeks, and soon a month had passed since Eric's last call. Sophia kept the house running smoothly, but she felt her boss's absence more and more. Not just for Thomas, but for herself as well. One afternoon, while helping Thomas with his homework, the boy asked a question that caught Sophia completely off guard. Aunt Sophia, do you like my father? Sophia felt her face heat up. Of course I do, Thomas. Your father is a good man and a good boss. Thomas shook his head impatiently. No, Aunt Sophia, I mean, do you like him? Like in the stories? Sophia was speechless for a moment, her heart pounding. Thomas, it's complicated. Your father and I are just friends. The boy looked at her with wisdom beyond his years. But you're different when you talk about him. And he always asks about you when he calls. That's not just being friends, is it? Before Sophia could answer, they were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. To their surprise, it was Clara. Hello, Sophia, she said, her tone cold. I've come to pick up Thomas to spend the weekend with me. Eric called me and asked me to spend more time with him since he can't be here. Sophia felt a pang of jealousy and worry. Why hadn't Eric mentioned this to her? As Thomas prepared to leave with his mother, Clara pulled Sophia aside. Don't get too used to this surrogate mother role, Sophia. Eric will be back soon, and things will go back to normal. Clara's words echoed in Sophia's mind long after they left. She found herself alone in the large mansion, feeling more lost than ever. That night, unable to sleep, Sophia wandered the halls of the house until she reached Eric's office. Hesitantly, she entered, enveloped by the familiar scent of his perfume. Her eyes fell on a photo on the table, her, Eric, and Thomas smiling during an impromptu picnic in the garden. It was then that reality hit her full force. She wasn't just taking care of this family, she had fallen in love with them. With Thomas, yes, but with Eric too. With tears in her eyes, Sophia wondered how she had gotten to this point, And more importantly, what would happen when Eric finally came home. What Sophia didn't know was that at that very moment, thousands of miles away, Eric was making a decision that would change the course of all their lives. He had realized something important during his absence, something he could no longer ignore. It was time to return home to his family and to Sophia. Dawn brought an unexpected change to the Godot mansion. Sophia woke up to the sound of movement and voices coming from downstairs. With her heart racing, she quickly dressed and went downstairs, only to be met with a scene she had not expected to see so soon. Eric was back. He stood in the entrance hall, surrounded by suitcases and chatting animatedly with Thomas, who seemed unable to contain his joy. When Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs, they both looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "Sophia," Eric said, his tone soft and filled with an emotion she couldn't decipher. "Mr. Godot," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "We didn't expect you so soon." Eric smiled, a smile that made Sophia's heart skip a beat. "I've decided I've been gone for long enough. There are important things here at home that need my attention." Thomas jumped for joy. "Daddy said he won't be traveling for a while, Aunt." "Sophia, isn't that great?" Sophia forced a smile, though inside she was a whirlwind of emotions. "That's wonderful, Thomas. I'm sure you two have a lot of catching up to do." Throughout the day, Sophia watched father and son reunite, feeling a mixture of joy and apprehension. She was happy for Thomas, of course, but she couldn't help but wonder what Eric's return would mean for her and the place she had found in this family. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Eric called Sophia into his office for a chat. She walked in, her heart pounding against her chest. "Sophia," Eric began, his voice serious, "I want to thank you for everything you did while I was gone. Thomas told me how amazing you were." Sophia blushed slightly. "There's no need to thank you, Mr. Godot. I love Thomas, and it was a pleasure taking care of him." Eric looked at her intently. "And that's exactly what we need to talk about, Sophia. About love and care." Sophia felt her stomach do a somersault. "What do you mean?" Eric stood, walking to the window before turning to face her again. "During my trip, I had a lot of time to think about my life, about Thomas, and about you." Sophia held her breath, not knowing what to expect. "I realized," Eric continued, "that you've become much more than an employee to us. You're part of this family now, Sophia, and I've developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude or friendship." Eric's words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. Sophia felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Mr. Godot, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Eric frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. Who could it be at this hour? They went downstairs together and, to both their surprise, found Clara at the door, looking agitated. "Eric," she exclaimed, "why didn't you tell me you were back? I came as soon as Thomas told me." The tension in the air was palpable. Clara looked from Eric to Sophia, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the closeness between them. "Sorry, Clara," Eric replied, his voice strained. "I just got here and I'm still getting organized." Clara entered uninvited, her gaze fixed on Sophia. "And I assume you're here to help with this organization, aren't you, Sophia?" Before Sophia could respond, Eric intervened. "Clara, don't start. Sophia has been an integral part of this family and deserves our respect." Eric's words, though well-intentioned, seemed to only inflame the situation further. Clara laughed, bitterly. "Family? Is that what you are now? A happy, fake family?" Sophia felt the weight of Clara's accusations and Eric's unspoken expectations. She was in the middle of an emotional minefield, and every step felt dangerous. "I think I'd better take my leave," Sophia said finally, her voice low. "You two need to talk." As she walked away, she heard the argument between Eric and Clara grow. Louder, words like guardianship, responsibility, and family echoed through the halls. Sophia took refuge in her room, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Eric's words about his feelings for her, mixed with Clara's accusations and her own fears and insecurities. She picked up the phone, desperately needing advice. Her fingers hovered over Carlo's number, but something made her hesitate. Instead, she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Hello?" a female voice replied on the other end. "Mom," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "I need your help." While Sophia confided in her mother for guidance and comfort, the fate of the Godot family was being decided downstairs. Eric and Clara were having a conversation that would determine not only Thomas's future, but Sophia's place in their lives as well. What none of them knew was that Thomas, awakened by the noise of the argument, was listening to everything hidden at the top of the stairs. The boy's silent tears were a silent testimony to the emotional turmoil that shook the mansion that night. As the night wore on, it became clear that nothing would be the same the next morning. Decisions would have to be made, truths faced, and hearts put to the test. Sophia, Eric, Clara, and Tomas were about to enter a new chapter in their lives, one that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and the definition of family. Day dawned at the Godot mansion with a palpable tension in the air. Sophia hesitantly descended the stairs, unsure of what she would find after the events of the previous night. To her surprise, the house was silent, with only the distant sound of voices coming from the kitchen. When she walked in, she found Eric, sitting at the table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. His eyes were tired, as if he hadn't slept. "Good morning, Sophia," he said, his voice husky. "Please sit down. We need to talk." Sophia obeyed, her heart pounding. "Mr. Godot, about last night." Eric held up his hand, gently stopping. "Huh? First of all, I want you to know that what I said yesterday is true. My feelings for you are real, Sophia, but the situation is complicated." Sophia nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I understand. Clara wants full custody of Thomas," Eric said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "She thinks my absence and your constant presence are damaging to him." Sophia's world seemed to crumble at those words. "But Thomas is happy here. He loves you, Mr. Godot." Eric smiled sadly. "I know, and that's why I can't let you go. Sophia, I'll fight for custody of my son, but that means that maybe it's best if you step away for a while." The words hit Sophia like a punch in the stomach. "Move away? But Mr. Godot, At that moment, they were interrupted by Tomas, who entered the kitchen with his eyes red from crying. "I don't want Aunt Sophia to go away," he shouted, running to hug Sophia. "Please, Daddy, don't send her away." Eric looked shocked. "Tomas, were you listening to our conversation?" The boy sniffed, still clinging to Sophia. "I heard you and Mommy fighting last night. I don't want to go away with Mommy. I want to stay here with you and Aunt Sophia." Sophia felt her heart break as she saw Thomas's suffering. She looked at Eric, silently begging for a solution. Eric knelt beside his son, his voice soft. "Thomas, no one is going to take you away from me. And Aunt Sophia, well, we're just trying to do what's best for everyone. But the best thing for me is to stay with you two," Thomas insisted, tears streaming down his face. At that moment, the doorbell rang, breaking the tension of the moment. Eric went to answer it, returning moments later with a serious expression. "It's Clara's lawyer," he said quietly to Sophia. "They want to discuss custody terms." Sophia felt like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. She knew this could be the end of everything she had built with the Godots. "Mr. Godot," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "I know my presence may complicate things, but please do not take me away from Tomas. He needs stability now more so than ever." Eric looked at her for a long time, an internal battle clearly visible in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "You're right, Sophia. We can't just think about ourselves right now. Thomas must be our priority." He turned to his son, who was still clinging to Sophia. "Thomas, I promise I'll do everything I can to keep our family together, including Aunt Sophia." Eric's words brought a glimmer of hope to Sophia. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that everything would work out. The next few hours were tense. Sophia stayed with Thomas while Eric met with the lawyers, The boy was restless, asking questions that Sophia barely knew how to answer. "Aunt Sophia," Thomas said in a moment of calm, "do you love my father?" The question took Sophia by surprise. She hesitated for a moment before answering honestly, "Yes, Thomas, I love your father, and I love you too." The boy's face lit up with a smile. "So we're a real family, aren't we?" Before Sophia could respond, the door opened and Eric walked in looking exhausted, but with a determined glint in his eyes. "Sophia, Thomas," he said, his voice firm, "I have a decision to make, and I need your input." Sophia and Thomas looked at each other, apprehensive but curious. Eric continued, "We can fight in court for custody, which would be a long and painful process for everyone. Or we can try something different, something that keeps our family together, one way or another." "What? Do you mean Daddy?" Thomas asked, his voice small and hopeful. Eric looked directly at Sophia, his eyes filled with emotion. "Sophia, I know it's asking a lot, but would you be willing to officially become part of this family? As my wife and Thomas's stepmother?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia felt as if the world had stopped. She looked at Thomas, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes, and then back at Eric, whose expression was a mixture of love, fear, and determination. At that moment, Sophia knew she was facing the most important decision of her life. A decision that would not only affect her future, but that of everyone around her. With her heart racing and her mind in turmoil, she opened her mouth to give her answer, knowing that her next words would change everything forever. The silence that followed Eric's proposal seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Sophia could feel her heart beating so hard, she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. She looked at Thomas, whose eyes were shining with hope, and then back at Eric, who was watching her with a mixture of love and apprehension. Finally, Sophia found her voice. "Eric," she said softly, using his first name for the first time, I love you both more than I can say, but getting married like this so suddenly, I'm not sure it's the right solution." Eric's face fell, but before he could speak, Sophia continued, "However, that doesn't mean I don't want to be a part of this family. I just think we need to find a path that is fair and honest for everyone, including Clara." Tomas, who had been holding his breath, finally spoke, "But you love each other, don't you? Why can't you just be together?" Sophia knelt in front of the boy, holding his hands. "Sometimes, Thomas, loving someone means doing things the right way, even if it takes a little longer." Eric, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Sophia is right, son. We can't solve this in a hurry, but that doesn't mean we're going to give up." At that moment, the doorbell rang again. It was Clara arriving to pick up Thomas for the arranged weekend. The tension in the air was palpable as she entered the room. Clara looked from Sophia to Eric, her eyes narrowing. "What's going on here?" "Itito," was Thomas, who answered, surprising everyone. "Mummy, Daddy, Aunt Sophia, you all need to stop fighting. I love you all and I don't want to lose anyone." The boy's words seemed to hit the three adults like a bolt of lightning. Clara, who had always seemed so combative, suddenly looked vulnerable. "Oh, my love," she said, hugging Thomas, "no one will lose you." Eric stepped forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Clara, I think it's time for all of us to talk. No lawyers, no threats, just us thinking about what's best for Thomas." To everyone's surprise, Clara nodded. "You're right. We've already caused our son enough pain." The next few hours were intense with difficult conversations and raw emotions, but slowly a new understanding began to emerge. Clara, seeing the genuine love Sophia had for Tomas, began to let down her defenses. Eric, in turn, recognized that he needed to be a more present father, regardless of his romantic situation. By the end of the evening, a preliminary agreement had been reached. Thomas would stay primarily with Eric, but Clara would have frequent visits and would be an active part of her son's life. Sophia would continue to live in the mansion, not as Eric's wife, but as an important presence in Tomas's life. "This doesn't solve everything," Eric said, looking at Sophia with love in his eyes, "but it's a start, an honest start." Sophia smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and hope. That's all we can ask for now. In the months that followed, life at the Godot mansion found a new rhythm. Eric cut back on his business trips, prioritizing time with Thomas. Clara, freed from the fear of losing her son, became a more positive and collaborative presence. And Sophia, though not officially part of the family, was loved and respected by all. A year after that fateful night, Sophia and Eric finally made their relationship official with Thomas's blessing and Clara's grudging respect. The wedding was a celebration not only of their love, but of the unconventional family they had built together. At the reception, Thomas took the stage, surprising everyone with a speech. "When I was younger," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "I thought families had to be one way. But now I know that families can be many different ways. The important thing is love." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Thomas finished. Sophia, with tears in her eyes, hugged the boy who had become her son of the heart. Eric joined in the hug, completing the family circle. Later that night, as they danced under the stars, Sophia looked at Eric and smiled. "Who knew cleaning your house would bring me so much happiness?" Eric chuckled softly. "And who would have thought that hiring a cleaning lady would change my life completely?" They looked at Thomas, who was dancing happily with Clara across the room. The scene was a testament to how love, patience, and understanding can overcome even the most difficult challenges. Sophia rested her head on Eric's shoulder, finally feeling at peace. She had found not just love, but an entire family. A family that, while unconventional, was perfect in its own way. And so, under the starry sky, surrounded by those they loved, Sophia and Eric danced, celebrating not only their love, but the power to choose happiness, to redefine the meaning of family, and to believe that sometimes happy endings happen in ways we could never imagine.